Good evening. Welcome to another edition of the 411 Talk Zone radio show right here on YouTube. My name is Leon Jones, and this evening I'm going to give you a review of political ideologies. And I'm going to present a chart that features the four types of government as well. And I'm doing this because you have a number of individuals here in this country. Now, I heard of Sergeant Willie Pete's video, and there were some things I agree with and some things I didn't agree with. But people can agree, people can disagree. Now, what he was saying in his video is that, and there is some truth behind it, because we talk about this younger generation on why they gravitate to socialism. Well, number one, a number of them don't even know what socialism is. They hear it from their college professors and they believe it is the best thing since sliced bread. Well, we already know that most socialist and communist countries don't work. Now, the problem with capitalism is that it doesn't trickle down. There's a lot of ownership, and the individuals who are at the top become even more and more rich. And that leaves everybody else in a class of peasantry. That is true. And I would say the same thing if there was communism, because it's the individuals who are actually running society that get all the perks. You see what I'm talking about? Capitalism and communism, you have ownership and you have government here. But the problem is, both styles of government have a lot of corruption. And then you have your fascism and socialism. They're opposite sides of the same coin. See what these millennials, the late millennials, and what some of the Zoomers want, they want the workers to be able to run everything. Well, the bottom line is you are a worker, you don't run production. But what the youngins want is they want to be able to buy a house. And I hear some of what they're saying. Now, of course, Sergeant Willie Pete, he mentioned Gen X. Well, I'm one of the early Gen Xers, but even my generation hasn't gotten the perks. Gen X, we're just probably middle managers or lower level managers. The individuals who are still running everything, particularly the government, you got your boomers, and even you got some of your silent generation. Now, Nancy Pelosi is about to retire, but you look at a lot of your politicians, whether they're local, whether they're state or federal. You have a lot of baby boomers and you have a lot of silent generation. Now, people think the silent generation, everybody's died out. No, that's not true. The silent generation basically ran up until, I'm going to say, from 1929 to right around 1944, in that area. That's where they run. But I do hear some of the baby boomers talking, and it's not a slap against them, but some of you do talk like everything is copacetic. You're giving these young individuals a lot of lying. See, a lot of the baby boomers and a number of the silent generation, they had the big perks with all of the pensions. It's the baby boomers who spent everything. Now, Gen X, most of us were in our mid 20s in 1990. So when 1990 came, some of us were just getting into the professional workforce. Many of us had just gotten out of college. Well, when the 90s came, that's when you had NAFTA. Everything was outsourced. So basically, people in my generation, they weren't getting much of the jobs either, but the baby boomers, they had all the perks. We were turned on to 401k plans. We had to pay for a lot of our health insurance. I know if you were a government employee as a baby boomer, particularly from the 80s, and you go back, well, they didn't have to pay for any health insurance. Everything was free. The pensions were better. Now, this is where I have to lower the boom on the baby boomers. The baby boomers are out here telling the younger generations to pull up your sleeves. Now, you do have some of the younger generation, they believe that they're entitled as well. But the problem is you have too much of the economics going to the richest people. Now, for Black people, we always look at it as white supremacy. Well, white supremacy is actually wrong because there are white people struggling as well. It's actually white elitist supremacy. See, everything may look to us as it's being defined by race, which in essence, it's defined by class. Now, what the younger generation wants, this is why they voted Mamdani, but you have to look at Mamdani. He talked a big game, but in the end, he's going to be another politician. He sounded good, but he's another Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez. He's going to make a lot of money. Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez, she was a bartender. And see, a lot of these boomers and individuals who are getting into politics, they have access to insider trading, which is illegal. That's why Martha Stewart got clipped and went to jail, because she lied about it. It was illegal. Now, when we have government shutdowns, did these politicians really care? Because a lot of the politicians have been bought and paid for by rich people. See, the problem, the reason why government doesn't work is we have too many individuals who are getting involved with it, so the rules can be favored to them. In other words, we have a lot of corporations in this country who are financing the government. And they're financing the government so the individuals at the top can get richer, whereas people like me have to continue to follow the rules. That's the problem. And what happens when I have to follow the rules, I'm always going to be on the plantation or subservient to some individual who has a lot of money. And even when you have a small business in this country, small businesses have to take it in the ass because they don't have as many resources as some of these larger entities. And better yet, when it comes to outside interests getting into politics, if you really look at the whole system, the businesses are paying the judges off, the politicians off, they're paying everybody off. And when you're paying everybody off, the individuals at the bottom suffer. And this is, it's like we're the proletariat class, we're the peasants. And in the end, what you really have here is a bunch of feudalism. So you have these different political ideologies to try to make everything equal. But you can try to put socialism into this country. What the bottom line is, for the youngins who want socialism, I'm not going to tell you to lift up your sleeves and go to work, because that ideology doesn't work. We are in an AI type of society now. We're no longer in the industrial revolution. But to believe in socialism to try to afford a house, that's not going to make it better for anybody either. Whenever you put the government stamp on anything, you are now being controlled. The bottom line is, when it comes to immigration and people who are for immigration, I would say this: if you are really looking for socialism, communism, go over and live in those countries. I mean, America, it has a lot of its own issues. There is a lot of unfairness. And we have a two-party system here. And unfortunately, both parties are corrupt. And what you're always going to have in this country when it comes to government, you're going to have years where the Democrats are going to run it, and you're going to have years where the Republicans are going to run it. But the bottom line, when it comes to politics in this country, we have too many incumbents. I mean, now the judges have gotten even more and more activist. So basically, we have three branches of government. They're all corrupt. Now, they've been corrupt for a long time, and we call it crony capitalism because it's about the money. The problem is, when it's about the money, certain people don't have to play by the rules because they have the money. People like me have to pay to play. I mean, just here in Indiana, you had a woman who took $135,000. Forgotten what county it is, but she still has her job. Now, me, if I had taken $135,000, I'm going to jail with a felony. And when you have any large entity, even corporations are crooked. See, the bottom line is, the older people didn't pass any knowledge down to the younger people. That was from the baby boomers to Gen X to the millennials to the Zoomers. And see, the individuals who were born in the 20s, 30s, 40s, 50s, and some in the early 60s, between 60 and maybe 63. But the ones born in the early 60s, they really haven't benefited either. But I'm saying the ones who are in their 70s, late 60s, 70s, into their 80s, they actually lived in America when it was the American dream, where everybody could afford a house. I mean, people like me, I can't afford a house in these prices. Everything is sky high. Now, do I believe in socialism? No, I don't believe in socialism. I believe in ownership. Now, of course, not everybody can have pure ownership. But the bottom line is, you have a number of these young folk, and they're upset. They're upset that, and this is where I'm upset with this administration, they're not making any arrests. The law and order that they talked about, it's become chaotic because the left wants to continue their chaos, but the right, they're not putting anybody in jail. Now, I know the Trump administration hasn't been in there for a year. Are the tariffs working? They're working somewhat, but there has to be adjustments in the tariffs. I mean, I know why the tariffs, see, the left and the right may have good intent, but because the system has always been corrupt, you have individuals who have been part of the system for a long time who have benefited on both sides of the political spectrum. And when it comes to our government, the bottom line is, for me, do I trust our government? No, I don't trust our government at all. Do I trust big corporations? No, I don't trust them either. It's generally small businesses, but the problem is we have a lot of monopolies because the big businesses out here, like your Walmarts and your Amazon, they're donating to all these politicians. You see the big businesses, they're running the mom and pop stores out of communities for Walmarts and for Amazons and for Kroger's. And see, what you have to understand about capitalism, there is a lot of competition. And on the flip side, you have individuals that don't understand the competition. Because what it is we've been taught to go to college to get a degree to go work for somebody. Work for somebody for about 30 years to get what? Some retirement. Well, many of us, unless you work for the government when it was really good, many of us don't have a pension. Many of us have Social Security. And Social Security is based on the amount you put in. Because if you didn't work a lot, you're not going to get a large Social Security check. But when you have a lot of the young folk in here, and I can understand why they're upset, because they can't get the American dream. They're always told you got to roll your sleeves up. Well, you can roll your sleeves up, but that's not working smart necessarily. See, the value system today isn't the same as it once was. You have to think differently. Today, we have more information. Back when we had the Industrial Revolution, yes, it was more blood, sweat, and tears, but there was also innovation, but it was also more opportunities because you had more migration to a lot of your major cities. Nowadays, because of the 90s and NAFTA, from my humble opinion, where everything was outsourced, you now have companies that are simply buying other companies. I know I work in the engineering firm. And some of the largest engineering firms have bought some of the smaller engineering firms, like Bechtel. They're one of the largest ones. AEC, Hunt. I worked for a company called Dim Jim Harris. Well, I had to leave Dim Jim Harris. Why? Because AECom bought them up. And that's essentially what's happening. And if you look at your cell phone providers, I remember before it became T-Mobile, it was VoiceStream. Now, why am I saying all this? Because I'm telling you, particularly in the last 30 years or greater, how the monopolies have taken place. The bottom line is, we're supposed to have all this and all these antitrust laws. Bottom line is, the reason why nothing is going to change for some people because we have too much money that's going into politics from big donors. If we take the big money out of politics, then we might be able to have fair and square elections without the cheating. Yes, I do believe in showing a voter ID to the polls. Get rid of, in my humble opinion, mail-in voting. Now, you had some guy named Scott, whatever his name, he's running for governor in California. He wants phone voter registration so more cheating can occur. See, the bottom line is the two-party system, the reason why it's not working because they both, in my humble opinion, they both talk a good game about the Second Amendment. They don't want the Second Amendment. They both talk about affordability. They don't want affordability. It's all a game. They want to keep the money for themselves. And then we hear both of them talking about socialism and capitalism. Meanwhile, those individuals, they want crony capitalism. Even some of the Democrats on the left. You don't think the Democrats don't have any money. They have a hell of a lot of money. Bottom line is they come around and talk a good game. But in the end, even when you are campaigning, even if you lose the campaign, that money is yours. It's a lot of money going into politics, and all politics is nothing but bullshit. But many people don't understand that. And we're going out here marching, burning down buildings, killing folk out there. Meanwhile, nothing's changed. Bottom line, if you really want effective change, you have to understand what system you want. Yet socialism sounds good. Communism even sounds good to some people. But you got to go ask people who have actually lived in a socialist and a communist system. See, to the young folks, it sounds good thinking that, okay, they say, well, build more houses, build more houses. Well, it takes money to build more houses as well. Where are we going to put them? What types of housing are we going to build? You have some individuals, they want rent control. How is that going to work? Bottom line is, there are all these ideas that are coming out. But in essence, nobody's doing anything about what they're saying. I mean, when Mondani and Trump were talking. So on the left, they had a fascist on that the left is talking about, and the right is talking about a communist. But isn't it dangerous when a fascist and a communist agree? Ask yourself that question. To me, that's dangerous. Because that means both of them are coming from opposite sides of the same coin. But if they agree, somewhere in the middle, they see something that's going to give them an advantage. That's why a number of individuals who voted for Mamdani, they're not talking so highly about him. And now he's about to take office in 2026. And they're going to really see what's going to happen. But see, you have a lot of individuals when it comes to politics, and this is even older folk as well, who are very ignorant about how the system actually works. They don't understand how the system works because they've been taught to think one way. Now, let's get into a little bit of discussion here. A little bit of, let's say a little bit of PowerPoint here. And again, we'll talk about a little bit of socialism, communism. Let's make sure we have everything. I don't want that screen. Let's talk about so many ideologies, political ideologies. This is going to be a teaching lesson. We're going to talk about the political ideologies because when it comes to living, everybody who's smart wants a good quality of life. So talking about, and I've already gone over political ideologies one time, so this is a review, but I'm going to add some different aspects of it because we're going to have the introduction, the nature of ideology, conservatism, liberalism, feminism, environmentalism, theocracy. Theocracy is on the right. This is what you have in the Middle East. Anti-globalism. This is what you have. Marxism, democratic socialism, communitarian. We have everything. Now, when we deal with the nature of ideology, ideology is a system of ideas concerning phenomena, especially those of social life, the manner of thinking of a class or an individual, shorter OED. So internally, consistent sets of ideas about how society should be run and be sometimes negative connotations. Now, when we deal with reverence, we talk about understanding our place in society. So, under pre-modern societies, there were a lot of spiritual values, goals, regulations. Then you had your hereditary class and your status systems. Then you had your aristocracy, your monarchy, and your theocracy. That was back, and this is to show you what's going on when the times change. And basically, a lot of those monarchies, well, they were still over there in Europe. But in the 1700s, this is when things start to swing differently from what you had during the pre-modern society. On a modern society, this is when you had your 18th century onwards. The 18th century started from 1701 to 1799, or 1701 to the 18th century, 1701 to 1800. So, under the modern societies, you have your 18th century onwards, your humanitarian values and ideals. You have your human progress towards a better society. This is when you heard of socialism, liberalism, and that equals the grand narratives. Then, here in the post-modern society, you have your loss of, or your demise of the grand narratives. You have the collapse of communism in the former Soviet Union. Then you have a loss of confidence in ideology by the left and the West. Now, when it comes to socialism, what kind of socialism do these young folks want? Because I'm sure they don't want the socialism. What I believe they want is a system that has a mixture of capitalism and socialism. This is what I believe they want, because they want to be able to have some ownership and some attachment to what they own, yet they want to be able to have competition where the finances aren't heavily on the wealthiest people. That's what I believe they really want. And that can work if individuals would understand it or if you were reasonable. But unfortunately, human nature has a lot of greed. And within every system, you're always going to have somebody that wants to be the ruler or who wants more than anybody else. That's the problem. Can we change the mindset? I doubt it. Current politics. So basically, current Western politics. Parties need to capture the floating voter. What is the floating voter? A floating voter is basically the independent voter. See, what's happening now is Donald Trump, they got the base. So when it comes to voting, out of 100%, 40% vote left, 40% vote right, and you're trying to get the 20 in the middle. The best thing, if you really want something, the most common sense is to get rid of radicalism on both sides. Now, sometimes in order to move further to the center, there's going to have to be some radicalism when there's a system, whether it's on the right or on the left, that's totally unfair. And generally, really, what Mamdani and what Trump have, they have more of a populist movement. It's more anti-globalization. Now, here's the thing that you must understand when it comes to the current Western politics, besides capturing the floating voter. There's a movement to the center. Then policies are guided by opinion polls rather than ideology. Now, I've always been against polls because polls don't give you an accurate sample. What types of questions are you asking people? How many questions are you asking people? How long are the questions? In other words, are you putting so much into a question that some people are, in other words, is the question loaded? Then we have the idea of when we deal with polls, who's taking the polls? Polls tend to be biased, and I can prove it to you right now. Last year, when Kamala Harris got into the race, the polls tended to shift her way. Well, what was happening was you had different polls that were oversampling the Democrats. And then what would happen was the Democrats would stop polling for a while and they would use that same data that's a week, 2 weeks, even a month old. So they weren't really polling, but they were trying to get the people to believe the polls. And see, you have to change the mindset of people too. Now, again, we'll see how these midterms turn out. But the bottom line is you just have a lot of people, particularly the young ones in here, not going to understand the cost of college. It's more expensive. Wages, they're staggered. Housing prices are high. The economy is not working for some individuals. And I'm talking about the individuals who are doing the right thing. Because you have too many baby boomers. Now, you might have some Gen Xers, but it's mainly the baby boomers and the living silent generation folks who really have all the money and they don't want to let any of the money go. See, what we Gen Xers are going to fuss about are probably social issues like transgenderism and stuff like that. But when it comes to economics, many of us, even Gen Xers, we know who has all the money. We know who has all the power. It's in the baby boomers. You look in the government. You got people like Maxine Waters. They're telling us how to live. You look at Bernie Sanders, flat out communist. But you know what? They're going to tell us about communism, but they're living a capitalist life. That's what you got to understand about the politicians. They're giving us one issue or one ideology because they want us to be poor. And this is on both sides. And you have the current political discourse, they still use ideological terms, references to the right, left, socialism, neo-communism, neoconservatism, democratic socialism, neoliberalism. That's neoliberalism. And you also have an anti-globalization, a rise in populism. Trump is a populist president. Mamdani, well, again, we're going to find out how he runs New York. When in the end, you have to look at what's going on in this country. Now, again, for any of you who want to go and live in other countries, be my guest. See how those governments are run. I know a lot of people, some people don't like America. Everybody's not going to work smart. Everybody's not going to work hard. But I know we can't keep telling the young folks, oh, we got to work hard. We got to change the way of thinking. We have to integrate into the more information age, because that's where we are. We're in the AI age now. We're not in that age to where everything is BWT, blood, sweat, and tears. Political spectrum. Now, again, I've already done this, so this is a review for some individuals. So, you have what I call a double parabola. So, what you have anarchism on the left, fascism on the right. Now, you have Marxism, democratic socialism, social democracy, third way, conservatism, neoliberalism, and fascism. Now, if you look at this parabola, you have anarchism and fascism. What does that all mean, to tell you the truth? Well, when you look up in this area right here, this means that there's radicalism. That's what that means. When you're down here, you're a reformist, you're a radical, like feminism. Reformist, radical. Environmentalism, reformist, radical. Anti-globalism, theocracy, populism. These are terms you hear about. Now, if you look at all of these ideologies, there's nothing in the middle. Nothing. But now, the UK parties. This is when you have your Conservative Party, your Churchills, your Macmillans, 1951 to 64, 1970 to 74. Then you have your liberalism, your neoliberalism, that's also conservative. And then they had their Marxists, communists, not in government. Then you had your Labor Party, people like Attlee, people like Wilson and Callahan, Labor Party, liberal Democrats, social democracy, third way. In fact, a number of what you're getting right now here in this country all comes from Europe. Some of your professors came from these other countries as well to teach in our universities. And you have your anti-globalists, your theocracy. Now, you're not going to have your theocracy on the left. That's on the right. And that deals a lot with religion. You never know. Namdani, because he is a Muslim, he could be under theocracy. Again, and I'm bringing these other countries up because they're similar to the West. UK, Australia, Canada, and the United States. They have their conservatism, Liberal Party, National Party. You notice under conservatism in Australia, your liberals are conservatives. Liberalism is basically conservative. You have your Liberal Party, you have your liberalism, neoliberalism, you have your democratic socialism, social democracy, third way, environmentalists, anti-globalism, populism, theocracy. Now you notice the real radicals are not in government. We're here, they're in government here. You look at your Marxists and your communists, they're not in government in Australia. Or going back, if you look at UK, the Marxists and communists aren't in government. The globalists aren't in government. And that shows you something. So when we deal with conservatism, what we're dealing with is 19th century landed upper class. And the principles: stability, tradition rather than change, acceptance of inequality as natural respect for traditional institutions, values, monarchy, and family. So we're basically dealing with something that's pragmatic, and it's a role of government. Support for volunteerism. Now, I guarantee, and it is funny, to look at people on the left and even people on the right here, and I'm just talking from pure common sense, many of us who have any sense at all, I guarantee you, we have some liberal leanings and we have some conservative leanings. I guarantee this is what's not being stated. And the bottom line is if you really want to do something about this government, well, we need common sense people from the left and the right to deal with the government. The bottom line is even the young folk, they can go and protest, but it's got to be organized, well financed. And you have to have an issue, which they do have an issue. A lot of us have issues, but guess what? In order to get involved, we're going to have to join some lobbyist group with the money. That's the problem. Money is in politics, and individuals who were once honorable turn into savages with money. Greed. That's the problem with politics. I know John McCain, the late John McCain, was trying to deal with financial elective campaign finance reform. How good did that do? Really didn't do any good at all. You might have mavericks in politics. Well, if you're not part of the liberal cons, and what I mean by a liberal con, the liberals and the conservatives or the Democrats, they're going to overthrow you. Again, it's a special club that you have to be in. And the special club are the elites with the money. And they're on both sides of politics. Now, conservative parties, you have the UK, they have a conservative party, Australia, National Party plus Liberal Party pre-1996, USA, Republican Party, but also encompasses neoliberalism. What neoliberalism is mostly classic liberalism, not your progressive liberalism. Conservative principles in leisure, sport, and tourism. Government support for the elite activity and excellence. Support for volunteerism. Government aid to traditional and rural industries, agriculture, regional tourism, government aid. Now, when I see that word government aid, this is where I got to call the conservatives out. So, you have government aid, and we're dealing with tourism and everything. Government aid. So that's a program. So what are you doing with that aid? You're financing traditional and rural industries, which I do understand they need aid, but is that not called corporate welfare? Remember, welfare goes up just like it comes down. Now, I'm putting this out here because I'm asking these questions. Now, some people might agree with me, some people might not. I'm probably going to piss both the left and the right off because what I'm looking at is common sense. Government aid comes from the taxpayers. Well, regional tourism. Well, why would government aid go into regional tourism when all tourists have to do is go to places to pay for hotels, leisure? That's tourism right there. But why should they be government aid for tourism? Let's get into neoliberalism. Well, liberalism arose in the 19th century. Desire for freedom of individual trade as reaction against privilege. Later, free market principles. Hence, use of neoliberalism to indicate right-wing orientation. Principles. Freedom of the individual. Belief of the efficacy of competition. Minimization of government interference in markets, small government, reduced taxes, privatization of state assets. Now, let me stop there, because I know I did hear something that Tucker Carlson said. And Sergeant Willie Pete also said this too. In China, they have a communist government, and businesses aren't supposed to get into any government issues. Well, if you look at it here, businesses get into government issues here. This is why you have the elite class here. This is why we don't have smaller government. Because if you really look at it, even some of the conservatives out there, they want big government for themselves as well. Because they want somebody to rule over the proletariats. That's the peasants. And then you have your liberals. They also want government control. Now, I'm pointing out to you, we're on both sides. The ideologies aren't working because you have a lot of elitists. And these elitists, what they really want to do, they want to decrease the population because they don't care anything about the proletariats because they can always get peasants to do the work for them. They want slaves. That's why they want to keep the wages low. Many of them embrace illegal immigration because it keeps the wages low. Therefore, it reduces competition in a marketplace. Let's go to liberal, neoliberal parties. UK, Conservatives under Margaret Thatcher. Cameron, Australia, Liberals under John Howard, Tony Abbott. Turnbull, USA, Republicans under Ronald Reagan, George Bush, and of course, George W. Bush. Liberalism, neoliberalism, leisure, sport, and tourism. Leisure, sport, and tourism viewed as business sectors. It's a user-pays principle. Privatization, that's privatization of operation of leisure, sport, tourism facilities. That's privatization. Things privatized. Support for volunteerism. Freedom of individual choice. Some have advocated decriminalization of drug use. That's on the left. See, what I'm pointing out is there's areas on the left and the right that make no sense, but people don't understand because many Americans, they lead with their emotions. They get something, they don't really read about it or understand what they're reading. They just go along with it, thinking that they're making a point when in essence, they're not making any point at all. All they're doing is they're creating more and more chaos. All right, we have the big one, Marxism, neo-Marxism, origins, Marxism, the 19th century writings of Karl Marx and Friedrich Engels, neo-Marxism, 20th century writings adapting Marxism to later developments in Marxism. Principles, fundamental feature of society is economic relationships. Capitalist society characterized by clash of interests between the bourgeoisie capitalists who own the means of production, capital. And then you just heard me mention it, the ruling class or the workers, the proletariat, workers who own only their labor power. Capitalists seek to maximize profits by exploiting workers. Predicted that eventually capitalism will collapse. This should be hastened by workers' revolutionary action, overthrow capitalist systems, and take control of the means of production. I don't know how they're going to do that. I don't know. They can have all the movements, but I mean, they might be able to do it when all the old heads are gone. But while they're still here making money, they got systems because the individuals who are elitists, they can pay to get some of the proletariats knocked off. That's true. Then we deal with the Marxism and neo-Marxist parties. communist parties in power. 1970 to 89, Russia, the Soviet Union. 1945 to 89, Eastern Europe, now China, highly modified. Yet China has modified its communism. They do have some capitalism, but it's a communist state. Vietnam, Cuba, North Korea, and some Indian states. Now, there is a decline of communism in Russia and Eastern Europe, shook faith of Marxist, neo-Marxist Western social scientists. Then you have the rejection of all grand narratives. The Marxist, neo-Marxist theory remains a strong analysis critique of capitalism. Then we deal with the leisure, sport, and tourism, generation of false needs by advertising to create profits. Leisure as resistance to capitalism. And this is where we start to get into the youth subcultures and the subversive art. Now, this is nothing new because even the baby boomers who were in the 60s, they had social movements as well. They had professors like Cloward and Pivens. What they wanted in Cloward and Pivens was to basically have everybody overrun the welfare system, collapse it, so they can come up with something else. And then, when we deal with the neo-Marxists or the Marxism, there's divisiveness, there's elitism and competitiveness of leisure institutions. Public provision provides a human face for an oppressive system. And that's what's going to happen if we have totalitarianism and fascism. Democratic socialism, Marxism and 19th century unions, but also many earlier workers' movements. So there are principles, equality and fraternity, defense of working class interests versus middle ruling classes, state control of capitalism through ownership, control of key industries. What is that key industry? It's the government. The government's going to decide where the resources are going to go. State creation of more equality and welfare state through progressive taxation. That's what a number of individuals don't want. And you even think the Democrats on the left, and this is what you got to ask the left, I guarantee you take 90% of their income away, because you hear Bernie Sanders talking about billionaires. When he makes a hell of a lot of money himself, does he want 90% of his money redistributed to other people through progressive taxation? Hell no. So he preaches that socialism and communism, but if you look at how he's living, he's capitalist. This is why I don't even trust the Democrats. This is why capitalism will never die. Because you have individuals who talk socialism. See, people like me, we get all the socialist programs, and the socialist programs continue to control us and keep us on a plantation, whereas the individuals who are elitists, even if they preach equity, equality, socialism, and communism, they're not living it. Again, follow the action, and this is where you find out who people really are. A lot of us look at emotions and we don't use critical thinking. Now, when we talk about democratic socialism as well, it's changed through democratic methods, not by violence. But if you look at what's happening now on the left, they're utilizing violence. They're trying to bully the other side into capitulating to what the left wants. Now, is it working? It's not working. Now, democratic socialism, here's what's happening. Capitalism, in the sense, is tamed and is gradually replaced by socialism. Well, the reason why that's never going to work here is because, remember, when you have representatives in the federal government, guess what? They come from different parts of the country. So somebody from Indiana, where I live, is not going to have the same belief system as somebody who lives in New York. Because if everybody had the same belief, we'd be monolithic. then socialism would actually be here. Now, we do have some aspects of socialism, but we're not a full socialist country. And I don't even believe we're a full capitalist country. We're not. We just have individuals who have a lot of money who've been putting the money into the political system to get their way, while many of us have to abide by the rules. And again, we're not dealing in racism here, sexism here, we're dealing in classism. That's why when I hear the term white supremacy, well, there really is no white supremacy. It's white elitist supremacy, because whites have classism against other whites. If you're a poor white, the elitist white is not going to want to deal with you either. So you're going to have to rebel against your own white people. I mean, I already know what we blacks are going through. It's not many elite blacks out there. We don't see, when you don't control anything, you don't have power. And many blacks don't have power. Yeah, we have blacks who have money, but guess what? They don't have ownership to anything. That's the problem. You look at who owns all the sports, all your record companies. They're owned by elitists. Democratic socialism, Labour parties in UK, Australia, Europe, up to about the 1960s. Now mostly developed into social democratic parties. Then we'll deal with the leisure, sport, and tourism. Of course, there's support for state provision of leisure, sport, and tourism facilities and services. Free, highly subsidized provision, especially for disadvantaged groups. So in other words, this is where you get the term urban renewal, affordable housing. That could be subsidized housing. And I know for the elites, they don't want subsidized housing in their area because it's going to bring down the property value based on the types of people that are going to be in subsidized housing. This is why you have to be careful when you say affordable housing, because when we talk about affordable housing, what are they talking about? Are they talking about projects, public housing? Are they talking about condos? Are they talking about 900 square feet, single family homes? That is a question that I don't know. Where are they talking about putting all this affordable housing? And define affordable housing for me. I mean, what kind of price are individuals willing to pay? How do they make it affordable? Again, these are questions that we have no idea, because right now we're just hearing words go back and forth, but nothing is being done. And you look at all the protests. You had the No Kings protest. Did it really help? No. Even the midterms. Yeah, the midterms might say the Democrats win one part of Congress, like the House. Okay, here's the problem. You may stall some of Trump's agenda, but Democrats still don't have power in the Senate, because the Senate is where you make all the confirmation. Like if there's an impeachment, well, if they wanted to impeach the president and the vice president, it's not going to happen, because the Senate can only remove the president and the vice president, not the House. The House does hold the purse strings. So when it comes to these bills that the House and Senate put out, these SBs and these HBs, House bill, Senate bill, there's a lot of pork in these bills. Like, I did not see the big, beautiful bill, but when it comes to bills, many of these individuals, they have outside groups that write some of these bills as well, like Obamacare. Whatchamacallit back in 2010. What is her name? She's out of there. Nancy Pelosi. Somebody asked, what's in the bill? Oh, you got to read the bill. Well, you didn't read it. You just put it out there. But that's exactly what politicians do. And the problem is, we'll never have any change unless we get a new set of eyes in government. Right now, the baby boomers are still controlling the government. That's the problem. They're also controlling the workforce. Yeah, you have some Gen Xers, but the baby boomers and even some of the silent generation personnel, they're not going away easy. Social democracy in the third way, origins, compromise between socialism and conservatism. Third way developed in the 1990s to reshape social democracy. So you're right there in the middle. They call it social democracy. Principles, seeks more equality, supports state role, welfare state, but accepts capitalism will survive. Does not envision a socialist system. Adds obligation to welfare rights. Sounds like a fair system, but how does it work? Has it been tested? Social democracy, third way parties, UK, debates in the 1960s, 70s, moved Labour Party from socialism to social democracy. Third way, associated with Tony Blair, Labour Party leader, Prime Minister. Australia, Australian Labour Party followed the pattern of the Labour and UK. USA, left wing of the Democratic Party, often seen as social democratic. Third way associated with President Bill Clinton. Feminism, 19th, 20th century campaign for political rights, votes for women. Principles, ideology or movement, concept of patriarchy. Men organize, control society, and their own interest excludes and disadvantages women. Which I don't have a problem with women, because the issue with women is they want, on one hand, they don't want the patriarchy as far as controlling everything, but then they do want the patriarchy as far as traditionalism is concerned. And with women, this is the most confusing aspect of any political ideology. Then you have the reformists, reform the system, equal pay, equal opportunity, child care services. See, women want a lot more of the programs. But again, they want the traditional values for men. In other words, they want men to stay traditional while at the same time capitulate to their needs by creating equality for them, equal pay for them. So, what it is with feminism, what women want, radical Marxists, change the capitalist system fundamentally. Parties, generally, no specific political parties for feminism. That's a fact. Leisure and sport. Women generally have less leisure time than men. Bullshit. Women have a lot of leisure time. Men don't have whoever wrote this is telling a bold-faced lie. Men are constantly working. Women have a lot more leisure time. In fact, when women make money, generally money that women make is always their money. And it makes them look independent of men when they have their own money based on the men paying them for services like even prostitution, paying for their time at work. So women have a lot of leisure time. Tradition, culture, media limit acceptable leisure activities for women. Institutions, infrastructure of leisurely, traditional, dominated by men. Well, here's the problem with that. Women dominated institutions are still for women only. Male dominated institutions like the Boy Scouts of America, now as the Scouts of America, men have to share their institutions with women. So where's their equality? Really is no equality. Now, what women are trying to do, they're trying to utilize the leisure, which could be a means of resistance against patriarchy. Well, it's never going to happen. And then you have the reformist programs. See, women want to straddle the fence so they benefit both ways. You know, they want child care facilities, safety, which we all want safety. But the problem with women is they really want men to be subservient to them. In other words, they want men to provide everything, but not control it. That's what women want. And that is a fact. Particularly, you see it with a number of black women. They don't want men to have any control over anything that they build. And when you put women in charge of something, they'll just fuck it up. Because women are very, very emotional. They change with the weather, most of them. Now, there are exceptions to the rule, so I can put that out there. But for the most part, and I heard Brother Phil advise, shout out to him. He was talking about, well, I don't have any problem with women running a church. Maybe he doesn't, but if it doesn't go her way, there's going to be problems. Emotion and critical thinking don't go well with women. Women have an attitude of, I'm going to get back at men for what one or two specific men have done to them. That's how women see the world. It's a lot of misandry out here. But yet, you hear a number of women today talking about when we critique women, they say we're misogynists. No, we're not. We're critiquing you just like you're critiquing us. Every man who's had a woman has had some woman give him stress and pain, but we are able to deal with it. But we're supposed to coddle women, treat women like they're children. That's the problem. But women want all of these programs, but at the same time, they want to be independent. So, in other words, the programs that are given to them, somebody's paying for. And they talk about more leisure time. More men put money into the system than women. And the only reason why women might not have leisure time because they got around, number one, they're single and no man wants them. So they have to work. And number two, women have had children by the wrong types of men who are irresponsible. So they have to work as well or get on the system or live in poverty. So they're not going to have the leisure time. But I see women all the time drinking their lattes, eating their little vegetarian meals at cafes. So they have a lot of leisure time. What women don't do is save their money for retirement. They don't get into the stock market. They don't invest because they're about materialism. Let's get into environmentalism, 1960s, 1970s. Concerns about the human impacts on flora, fauna, and ecosystems. So you have to ask yourself the principles. Is it an ideology or a movement? Questioning of pursuit of economic growth at the expense of the environment. Emphasis on sustainability. Reformists legislate to prevent negative impacts, or that they really want development in certain areas. I remember the environmentalists cut off irrigation systems for suckerfish, that kind of shit. See, the intent is good, but they're not thinking what it does to the overall economy based on the fish. A fish is what we eat. They expect us to eat tofu all day? Because what it is, the environmentalism is also used to destroy the capitalist system. So it's basically a socialist or Marxist system. Particularly the Green Party is involved, and the Green Party exists in many countries. Now, the power has been shared in European countries. And when it comes to leisure, sport, and tourism as offenders in a communist and materialist society, leisure, sport, and tourism are major users of natural environments, requiring the use of sustainable development. That's what we get with the system of environmentalism. Then we have the big one out here, anti-globalism and populism. So basically, anti-globalism, this is where we had the NAFTA movement, 1990s, concerned with Western capitalism generally, activities of multinational enterprises in particular, globalization, antecedents and empires, and 19th century trade. So is it an ideology or a movement? So some are opposed to multinational enterprises. Why? Because what about the impacts? They're opposed to multinational enterprise impacts on the environment in developing countries. No specific parties, but some green parties are aligned with this movement. Origins, populism, nationalist, right-wing parties in Europe and Asia. Exit from the EU, known as Brexit. Election of Donald Trump, he's a populist. Principles, opposition to migration, opposition to immigration. A populist movement, opposition to immigration, concern with loss of traditional industries, desire to disrupt elites controlling traditional parties. That's what popular, that's what some people say Donald Trump is not doing that. Some say he is, but that's what populism is. You want to disrupt the elites. This is what you hear when it comes to draining the swamp. Draining the swamp has a lot of Washington elites involved in it. And then when it comes to implications for leisure, sport, and tourism, does not feature in any programs. But again, with the principles, you see now, Joe Biden was in favor of immigration. Donald Trump is opposed to immigration, concerned with the loss of traditional industries. Well, we had a loss of traditional industries here when NAFTA came. And what this administration is trying to do is disrupt elites controlling traditional parties. But the problem is the elites control all the wealth in this country. That's the problem, whether they're on the left and the right. And in the end, bottom line, you've got to understand what's going on with all of these ideologies. Now, I'm going to get into a chart so you'll know. This is something I'm going to share with you. So, when we talk about the main government structures here, and I've shown this before, we talk about socialism. So ownership under socialism. Individuals may own property in small businesses, state ownership of essential services, electricity, water, and internet. So in other words, they want the government to own the internet. For the most part, when it comes to electricity, some governments own the electricity. Some governments own the water. So that's already part of our life. Then equality, redistribution of income to create equal classes, total freedom of religion. We're already doing some of that through government programs. Prices, redistribution of wealth through government oversight, price control on staple goods, while much of the economy runs unfettered. That's not going to happen. High taxes, because this is taxes, focused on social services or welfare state. That's socialism. Healthcare, free and access to all, operated by the federal government. No, you want to keep the government out of the healthcare business. The people that you want to probably tone down are the insurance companies. Notable figures under socialism: Albert Einstein, Frederick Engels, Cesar Chavez, and a general philosophy. Internationalistic with idealized future based on redistribution of wealth to fund and support social programs. That's socialism. Now, let's get into fascism. Okay. Fascism, individuals may own property in small businesses. And this is on the flip side of communism. State ownership of essential services is through a dictator. You don't want that either. Nationalistic religion, unequal redistribution of wealth to reinforce a rigid class structure. Prices set around class structure and are influenced by supply and demand. High taxes focused on raising military funds for national defense. Accessible and free to all that meet requirements. Race, nationality, citizenship are usually factors. So you had Benito Mussolini, Adolf Hitler, Nicola Mandic. So basically, the philosophy under fascism, the nationalistic agenda usually centered around one powerful individual with an idealized past that encourages individualism. Some say Donald Trump is a fascist, which most people don't even know what fascism is. We have no king here. Now, does it seem like he's trying to get more power with the executive branch of government because we're supposed to have three co-equal branches of government? Some may say yes. I don't believe so. But people see things a little differently, and that's based on how you're living. Now we have capitalism. Individuals have right to own property, little to no government ownership of services or production. Equality, freedom of movement, and a free economy gives people equal opportunity to pursue life. Prices are set by consumer corporation through supply and demand. Competition brings with it lower prices and better products. Limited taxes to match limited government. Determined by the market, little to no government regulation. Adam Smith, Ronald Reagan, and George Washington were the key features. The free market will determine prices and competition will drive improvements. Then we have communism. Under communism, we basically, there's the entire elimination of property rights, no individual land ownership, no economic incentives to individually own. All are equal under the eyes of government, except the ruling class, which is in charge of the redistribution of wealth, which got to watch communism because what it is, let's say the resources come to a communist person or communist dictator. He may take 70% for himself, while the people, he'll tell them, here's 100% when it's really 30%, and they'll give him crumbs. That's what happens under communism. And also, prices are defined by the government who respond and control supply and demand to artificial control pricing. High tax, strict tax, high strict tax rates, high strict tax rates focused on redistribution of wealth to a central power. That means the government has access to everything. They control the society. Accessible to all but distributed unequally, less accessible to the poor. So the individuals who want communism, you will really be poor because all of the resources are redistributed unequally. So there's less access to poor people, operated by the federal government. This is where you hear people like Karl Marx, Vladimir Lenin, Joseph Stalin, and Fidel Castro. Again, capitalism has failed to help the working class because it only incentivizes individualism and therefore must be torn to force. That's communism. Again, if you really look at the United States, You might have people that have a little bit of all four of those government controls in America. That's why everything is always at a standstill. And when we deal with political ideologies, let's talk about it as I go up here. I had it up here. See if I can continue to find it. Here's the one that I wanted to: capitalism and communism explained. While capitalism and communism are often presented as opposing economic systems, in reality, the economies of most countries exist on a spectrum incorporating elements of both. The capitalist economic model relies on free market conditions for the creation of wealth. In the socialist economic model, the production of goods and services is either partially or fully regulated by the government. No economy is purely capitalist or socialist. Rather, most feature markets and social welfare systems tailored to meet the unique needs. That's the unique needs. That's the cultural values and historical context of their societies. And again, key takeaways: capitalism relies on private ownership and free markets, while socialism emphasizes central planning and public ownership. Most countries are mixed economies, blending elements of capitalism and socialism to varying degrees. Capitalism leads to innovation and economic growth, but critics argue it can also cause inequality. Socialism aims to ensure equality and meet human needs directly, yet can struggle with efficiency and innovation. So the balance between capitalist and socialist policies continue to be the topic of debate and reform. Again, what is capitalism? It's an economic system based on private ownership of the means of production, factories, offices, tools, and equipment, and their operation for profit. Central characteristics of capitalism include private property, capital accumulation, wage labor, voluntary exchange, and a price system derived from competitive markets. So basically, in the capitalist economy, decision making and investments are determined by owners of capital, i.e., wealth, property, and production and capacity, whereas prices and the distribution of goods and services are mainly determined by competition and markets for goods and services. What is socialism? Okay, we're going back to capitalism. Business owners who control the means of production and hire labor who are paid wages. I'll go back up there. Fundamental applications of capitalism or principles of capitalism include business owners who control the means of production and hire labor who are paid wages, private property rights, competitive markets, minimal government intervention in the economy. So in capitalism, prices and production are set by individuals and companies interacting in the marketplace. Capitalists argue that this free market mechanism leads to the most efficient allocation of resources. Then we go to socialism. Socialism is an economic system where the means of production are owned by the society as a whole, meaning that the value made by workers belongs to everyone in the society, rather than a group of private owners and investors. It is an economic philosophy based on the principles of shared ownership and cooperation. Production under socialism is meant to directly satisfy economic demands and human needs rather than indirect satisfaction and needs through market profits and capital accumulation. Now, of course, the essential goal of capitalism, of socialism, is basically, I'm telling you right now, the essential goal of socialism is to increase equality amongst members of society. Now, some of the key tenets of socialism are collective or private ownership of major industries and resources, collective planning and regulations to ensure equal distribution of wealth and fair provision of goods, production for social need rather than profit, cooperative management of the economy. So, with socialism, the means of production are commonly owned by the community or state on behalf of its citizens. Resource allocation and production are determined through central planning, while the goal of ensuring an equitable distribution of wealth and benefits to all members of society. So basically, in addition to capitalism and socialism, the other major school of contemporary economic thought is communism. While there are certain core similarities between socialism and communism, there are also important distinctions between both of them. So looking at it, I'm going to post this link. I'm going to post this link in my I'm going to post this link as I shared it. Shared everything. Here's where I got everything from. I explained it to you. So basically, we deal with capitalism. It's free enterprise. Socialism is really tries to create equality, but through means of the government. Now, just as I'm going to tell you this, when it comes to governments in general, most of the economies are mixed economies. There's no doubt about it. Bottom line is, many of us don't understand what a free society is. Now, are many of us free? No, because the problem with any type of economy, the intent sounds good, but we have so many individuals out there going back as I share my screen again, going back down to the historical development of capitalism and socialism. Basically, they originated in Europe in the early 19th century. Prior to their advent, the economic landscape of Europe was largely shaped by feudalism and mercantilism. Feudalism, feudalism is basically a system of hierarchy prevalent in medieval Europe. It relied basically on a fixed class structure wherein nobles granted lands of vassals, serfs in exchange for loyalty and, of course, military service. Now, with the decline of feudalism, many individuals no longer tied to the land sought work in cities, marking the beginnings of wage labor, and another system known as mercantilism emerged in around the late 16th century as cities began to attract larger populations and become centers of society. So under mercantilism, governments began to regulate their economies with the aim of augmenting state power, promoting exports over imports to accumulate wealth, and encouraging colonization for resource access. So basically, these systems established a foundation for the emergence of a labor market and facilitated the accumulation and concentration of wealth, thereby setting the stage for capitalism. And again, the advent of capitalism and socialism also coincided with a period of rapid industrialization and urbanization in the 19th century. So basically, as agricultural production became more efficient, populations shifted from rural areas to cities in search of better paying jobs, which is true because a number of individuals in the South moved to places like Chicago and New York. And populations, again, you had your urban centers. They swelled as people moved to find work in the new factories and mills. So what happened? This rupture of traditional agrarian lifestyles produced immense social displacements. Traditional bonds of families and community often broke down, replaced by impersonal labor relations. So basically, the sheer scale and speed of urbanization under industrial capitalism led to major problems like overcrowdedness. This is where you get the slums, the hood, unsanitary slums, child labor, grueling working conditions, stark inequalities of wealth. This climate of rapid social change and worker exploitation catalyzed calls for reform and, of course, regulation. And again, so we must understand, how did capitalism become a dominant economic model? Well, the restrictive trade practices of mercantilism were basically increasingly seen as inhibiting the potential of burgeoning market economy. So mercantilist policies often involve protectionist measures like tariffs, quotas, subsidies to boost local industries. So basically, colonies were exploited as sources of cheap raw materials and captive export markets. So the prevalent thought was the trade was a zero sum game, meaning that one nation could only enrich itself at the expense of others. So what happened was the rise of capitalism charged the mercantilist assumptions. So Adam Smith's The Wealth of Nations, published in 1776, made a case against government interference in trade based on the efficiency of free markets guided by the invisible hand. So over time, the capitalist ideas shifted economically, ideologically toward free trade and open competition. So by the end of the 19th century, capitalism had become the dominant economic model in the Western world, and the rise of industrialization during the period led to unprecedented economic growth and wealth in capitalist societies. However, it's also been exacerbated socio-economic disparities, leading to the emergence of a working class that was often subject to unsafe working conditions and, of course, low wages. So these inequalities sparked social and political unrest, leading to the rise of trade unionism and political movements advocating for social justice and labor rights. So it's also important to understand that the rise of capitalism in the context of European colonialism and the transatlantic slave trade, which paved the way for capital accumulation and consumption in today's capitalist societies. So the slave trade enabled European businesses to profit enormously from the forced labor of millions of enslaved Africans on colonial plantations by producing sugar, tobacco, cotton, and other commodities sold worldwide for consumption. Now, the emergence and growth of socialism. Well, the roots trace back to the late 18th century, particularly in the works of philosophers like Robert Owen and Charles Fourier. However, socialism did not become a prominent political and economic movement until the mid 19th century as a reaction to social problems created by industrial capitalism at the time and the growing inequality between a small group of wealthy business owners and the masses of poor workers. Socialist parties began forming by the end of the 19th century in Europe and the United States, advocating public ownership of industry. So by 1848, Karl Marx and his collaborator, Frederick Engels, published the book you all know about, the Communist Manifesto, which outlined a critique of capitalism based on concept of class struggle. Marx believed capitalism was inherently exploitative and alienating. He argued that the workers were denied the full value of their labor, the full value of their labor, of course, while owners reap benefits, creating unequal social relations between the bourgeoisie owners and the proletariat workers. Marx predicted that the internal tensions and contradictions of capitalism would heighten class conflict and ultimately lead to revolution by the oppressed workers. Manifesto concludes by declaring that proletarians have nothing to lose but their chains. They have a world to win. Working men of all countries basically unite. Working men of all countries unite. This rallying cry bolstered the burgeoning socialist movement. Socialist and Marxist ideas spread among the working class through labor unions, worker cooperatives, political parties, and activist organizations. So basically, major early victories included winning the right to form unions, instituting child labor laws, establishing the 8-hour workday, and other progressive reforms. Outside Europe, socialist and even communist revolutions occurred in places like Russia, China, and Cuba, where peasants and rural populations suffered extreme inequality and poverty. That's what happens when you have communism. So, like I said, going back, let's go back and give you more. Just bear with me. So we're up here understanding the principles of capitalism, the means of production. Primarily owned by enterprises and individuals, companies produce goods and services in order to generate a profit. So they decide to produce what's based on what is most profitable. Given market demand, they compete with each other for customers and free markets. So basically, in this way, successful companies and entrepreneurs can accumulate substantial wealth, but unsuccessfully, one's risk bankruptcy and closure. Labor in a capitalist economy is provided by workers in exchange for wages or salaries. These workers, unlike capitalists who control the means of production and reap the benefits from their sales, only earn their wages. They do not own the tools or machinery they use in production, nor are they entitled to profits derived from selling goods they produce. The structure effectively creates a social divide between owners, capitalists, workers, labor. Market forces, particularly supply and demand, drive prices in the capitalist economy rather than government price controls or mandates. So basically, business owners are incentivized to maximize efficiency and minimize costs to produce, well, basically to boost profits and increase their market share value, which fosters intense competition. Importantly, the competition fuels innovation and technological process in search of profits and market share. Companies basically develop and invent new processes or improve existing ones in order to undercut their competitors. This mechanism has led to significant technological advancements, of course, in many areas, including healthcare, communications, transportation, and more. However, these benefits of a market economy are not without certain drawbacks. Critics, and you're always going to have critics, but they contend to that unfettered capitalism can basically concentrate wealth in the hands of a small number of large corporations and individuals, which that is true. And what I'm going to tell you right now, this could lead to monopolistic tendencies or oligopolies that undermine competition. Capitalism's focus on profits may incentivize negative externalities such as environmental damage, worker exploitation, short-term thinking, and financial instability in the absence of thoughtful regulation. As fact, there's an active debate amongst economics or economists and policymakers regarding these potential benefits and drawbacks of capitalist systems. Some argue that prudent regulation can temper capitalism's access while preserving economic freedom, while others advocate for a greater role in government planning, or alter incentive structures under capitalism. Don't want to get government involved. Government will screw everything up. Now, exploring the mechanisms of socialism. So now in socialism, and this is a video you all need to definitely share so you'll understand what's going on. So in socialism, again, the society, and it sounds good, the society basically owns and controls major means of production, often through state-controlled measures, rather, or state-controlled industries or measures, rather than markets which distribute goods according to who can afford what. Central planners decide what should be produced and what quantities based on the consumer needs and fair allocation. Prices are set to ensure affordable prices for all citizens. As such, it is sometimes known as a command economy. So it sounds good in theory, because in theory, socialism aims to eliminate class divisions and create more of an egalitarian society shared through ownership and democratic control of industry. Production is intended to directly satisfy human needs rather than maximize profits, where individuals receive access to basic necessities like healthcare, education, housing, and employment that is either heavily subsidized or free of charge, funded by taxation. And again, personal property and small business still exist under socialism, but larger corporations and important industries are placed under public and cooperative ownership. Income levels are generally more equitable due to policies focused on worker protections, economic inclusion, and social welfare programs. Critics still argue that socialist central planning is inefficient compared to free markets. Excessive regulation stifles innovation by removing the profit motive, and it also reduces incentives for productivity and quality control. And of course, dependence, again, is based on the state, and that will erode individual liberties. Important, while some argue that removing the profit incentive under socialism stifles innovation that can still occur in the absence of profits or competition. For example, publicly funded research and development initiatives have achieved major innovations in areas like space exploitation, medicine, and technology. Open source software has also innovated rapidly through nonprofit collaboration. Now, what about mixed economies? Because I'm hearing that it's a blend of capitalism and socialism. Most modern economies are in fact, they're mixed economies. This means they exist somewhere on a continuum between pure capitalism and pure socialism. Again, most modern economies are in fact mixed economies. Again, this means they exist somewhere on a continuum between pure capitalism and pure socialism, with the majority of countries practicing a mixed system of capitalism wherein the government regulates and owns some businesses and industries. So in a purest form of a capitalistic society, sometimes referred to as a laissez-faire capitalism, private individuals are unrestrained and the economy operates without any government checks or controls. Private individuals and businesses may determine where to invest, what to manufacture and sell, and the prices of goods and services. So basically, this is where you can have corruption. You have to have some government involved, because when it comes to pure capitalism, this is where you can have your your duopolies, your oligopolies, and your monopolies. Now, but in a pure socialist system, all means of production are state-owned. Opponents argue this eliminates class divisions and allows for equal distribution of resources and profits. However, critics contend it concentrates excessive power in the hands of the state and removes market incentives. In practice, very few socialist countries have ever fully abolished all private ownership, even if the state exerts major control over the economy. Now, some countries incorporate both the private sector system of capitalism and the public sector enterprise of socialism to overcome the disadvantages of both systems. Now, in these economies, the government intervenes to prevent any individual or company from having a monopolistic stance and undue concentration of economic power. Resources in these systems may be owned by both the state and by individuals. So basically, you have the balance between public and private control, and it is constantly debated. But mixed systems allow societies to harness benefits of both capitalist and socialist structure. Sounds like it makes sense, but you have to have the right people involved in it. Problem is, you're going to have corruption on both sides. So the ongoing debate between socialism and capitalism in America, here's the big one. The debate between socialism and capitalism has long played out in America's economic policies and political discourse, as well as in Europe and elsewhere. Since its inception as a nation, capitalism has been deeply ingrained in the American social fabric by fostering a culture of entrepreneurship and a diverse marketplace of goods and services. The U.S. is often regarded as the epitome of a capitalist society with its strong emphasis on free markets, private property, and individual liberty. It has been and still is home to many of the world's largest and most influential corporations and has produced a significant number of successful entrepreneurs. However, the prevalence of capitalism has not entirely extinguished socialist ideas from the American discourse. So, in the late 19th and early 20th centuries, socialist and communist ideas gained some prominence in America, leading to reforms like public education, antitrust regulations, the 5-day work week, and child labor laws in the wake of the Great Depression in the 1930s. President Franklin Delano Roosevelt introduced the New Deal. It's a series of government programs and regulations aimed at providing relief, recovery, and reform. Many of these incentives, such as Social Security and Medicare, have a socialistic nature as they involve government intervention to promote social welfare. During during the Cold War era, socialism as an economic system became entangled with the politics of Soviet communism in the American psyche. Capitalism was pitted against socialism in an ideological battle of good versus evil, leading to heightened resistance to socialist policies in the United States. This binary framing left little space for nuance or balance, making socialism a dirty word in much of the mainstream discourse throughout the Cold War period. Any policy or program that resembled collectivism, increased government involvement, centralized planning, or wealth redistribution was branded as a dangerous and, of course, slippery slope toward Soviet style communism and generated not international, but irrational fear and distrust of socialist ideas amongst the American public. Now, in recent years, socialism versus capitalism debate has emerged in America. High profile politicians such as Bernie Sanders and Alexandria Ocasio Cortez have helped bring socialist ideas like universal health care, tuition free college, and higher taxes on the wealthy back into the mainstream. While critics still equate socialism with excessive government control and a loss of individual liberties, defenders argue that socialist policies can coexist with capitalism and democracy in ways that promote the greater good. Public opinion has become more favorable towards some government intervention in capitalism. For example, a Gallup poll in 2021 found around 40% of Americans believe some form of socialism would be good for the country, a level that has held steady since the 2010s. The rise of more democratic socialism demonstrates many Americans wish to seek a middle ground between unchecked capitalism and government dominated socialism. Important. It is wrong to imply that capitalism always inherently leads to inequality, while socialism always leads to equality. In truth, there are variations of both systems and outcomes that depend greatly on the implementation and broader political structures and social institutions. So, instances of socialist policies in the United States. While the United States has basically remained fundamentally capitalist, many programs incorporate socialist principles. Social Security provides retirement and disability benefits through a centralized social insurance system funded by taxes. Medicare, so you'll know what Medicare is. Federal government provided both health insurance for the elderly. Medicare, federal government provides health insurance for the elderly. Medicaid, so you know the difference now. Medicare, federal government. Medicaid, state government provides health insurance for low income residents. Public schools, primary and secondary education funded by government at local, state, and federal levels. State colleges and universities, higher education subsidized by state governments. U.S. military, collectively owned defense force funded through taxes. Law enforcement, fire departments, and garbage collection. Local government services available to all residents. Public libraries, local libraries available to all residents funded by taxes. Public parks, recreational parks built and maintained by local governments. Public broadcasting, although NPR, that got shut down. But again, the problem with NPR, too biased one way. But NPR and PBS, radio and TV stations funded by the government donations, again, such as PBS and NPR, public broadcasting, interstate highway system, federally funded network of highways available for public use. Progressive taxation. Higher earners pay a larger share of their income to fund social services. FDIC, Federal Deposit Insurance Corporation, government insurance on bank deposits to protect savers. Public housing, subsidized rental housing for low income families and individuals. Food stamps, SNAPs, federal food assistance vouchers for low income households. Veteran benefits and GI Bill, variety of programs to support and compensate military veterans. But also, jobs are created with the government for these programs. That wasn't said. It's where you get people who want to work in the public sector. Now, the main differences between capitalism and socialism: means of production, capitalism, private ownership, market based, based on private contracts, minimal intervention, driven by profit motive of supply and demand, market competition and profit motive, provide charity optional. Socialism, collective ownership, central planning, redistributed equally, excessive control, made to meet human needs, central planning, and shared incentives. Government programs provide basic necessities. Both systems exist on a spectrum. Very few societies adopt pure forms of either capitalism or socialism in practice. Most have mixed systems that combine elements of both philosophies. This demonstrates that capitalism and socialism exist more on a spectrum than as diametric opposites. For instance, the U.S. is generally considered a very capitalist country. However, the government does regulate certain industries like financial markets, healthcare, utilities, environmental standards, labor laws, and consumer protections. Moreover, the U.S. subsidizes industries such as agriculture, transportation, energy, and implements public welfare programs like Social Security, Medicare, pointing to socialistic elements in the largely capitalist economy. Even in areas where private companies operate, such as postal services or waste management, the government often chooses who can run those operations and sets strict regulations and standards. At the same time, countries like Sweden or France, which are viewed as socialist democracies, still allow substantial private ownership of businesses in most sectors. Their market economies coexist with expanded social welfare programs funded via taxation. Sweden, for example, has very generous universal social programs, but large and profitable companies like IKEA and H&M, that's H&M, flourish with private ownership. And while France nationalized several industries after World War II, private enterprise drives most of its economy today. Then there is China, a unique case that has evolved in a hybrid of capitalism and socialism. After its revolution in 1949, China was fundamentally a command economy, where the government controlled all the means of production and dictated economic output. However, from the late 1970s onward, under the leadership of Xiaoping, or Deng Xiaoping, China began to introduce market reforms. While it still identifies as a socialist country with Chinese characteristics, it has embraced a mixed economy. So, in this model, large state owned enterprises dominate strategic sectors such as energy, telecommunications, and defense, while benefits, or while private businesses, they do provide benefits. And China, remember, is a communist country. They're not socialists, they're communists. Again, most governments, and including China, the government controls the energy, telecommunications, and defense. But in China, private businesses and foreign investments have been allowed and even encouraged in other sectors. Today, China's economy is basically characterized by a mix of socialist planning, state ownership, and crucial sectors in open market capitalism and its burgeoning private sector. So basically, this balance of private ownership and market competition has led to unprecedented economic growth and lifted hundreds of millions of people out of poverty. And a mixed economy approach allows societies to incorporate the perceived benefits of both capitalism and socialism. So basically, private ownership and free markets can incentivize innovation and production. However, the government intervention and redistribution of resources can potentially address areas where free markets fail to survive or fail to serve, social needs equitably. So basically, the balance between capitalist and social policies remains a continuous debate. Now, types of capitalism and socialism. And see, this is why you got to get all the information out, because there are types of capitalism and socialism. And this is what people need to understand, given that most economies exist along a spectrum. There are different forms of capitalism and socialism with varying degrees of government intervention. People didn't know that. Varieties of capitalism: laissez-faire, strict free market model with no government involvement outside law enforcement and natural defense. Welfare capitalism maintains free markets, but the government provides basic social services and protections. State capitalism: the government exerts a strong direction of investment and some state ownership. Corporate capitalism: economy dominated by large corporations and minimal competition. Here's the one that I hate. We all hate: crony capitalism. You don't hear much about the other types of capitalism, but crony capitalism is where wealthy elites exert political influence to manipulate policies and maintain power. And that's what I just mentioned earlier. You got the elites who put their money to the government to influence the policies to keep them doing as they want to do. And then you have responsive capitalism, private enterprise combined with ethics and social responsibility, basically aims to balance profits with public welfare. Then what about the varieties of socialism? Communism, sometimes lumped in with socialism. Communism is a classless society with communal ownership and no private property. Democratic socialism, socialist principles achieved through democratic political processes. So basically, many industries are nationalized or cooperatively run. Market socialism, worker owned cooperatives and privately owned industry compete in market economies. Pragmatic socialism, socially owned sectors of the economy coexist with private enterprise and markets, focused on achieving socialist goals gradually through reform. Examples of socialist leaning countries. China remains officially communist but has implemented market reforms that allow substantial private business. The economy inhibits a mix of socialist planning and capitalist characteristics. Cuba, agriculture, industry, and services are most entirely state run and planned, while private businesses are very limited. Vietnam, similar to China, Vietnam maintains public ownership over major industries but has increasingly integrated market based reforms. Venezuela, oil production largely nationalized along with many other sectors, but sizable private businesses exist in consumer industries, suffering severe economic crisis. Bolivia, socialist president elected in 2006, implementing sweeping nationalization policies. Sweden, while private companies dominate and Sweden ranks highly on business freedom, they have high taxes and an extensive welfare system. Examples of capitalist leaning countries, of course, the United States. Economy based on private ownership and free market, but the government regulates many industries and provides welfare programs. Japan, private ownership dominates, but the government plays a more active role in directing some investment in business activity compared to other capitalist countries. Singapore, extremely business friendly, free market economy, consistently ranks among the most capitalist countries in measurements of economic freedom. Australia, free market economy with some government intervention, ranks high on economic freedom. Canada, mostly free market economy with universal health care and other social programs. Ireland, business friendly economy with low corporate tax rates to attract foreign investment. Switzerland, long tradition of capitalism, free trade, and minimal regulation. Powerful financial sector. Key thinkers of capitalism. Adam Smith developed modern free market economics, wrote The Wealth of Nations, advocating laissez faire policies. John Stuart Mill, influential classical liberal philosopher who supported free markets and individual liberty. Friedrich Hayek, Australian economist, defended free markets and criticized socialist planning. Ludwig van Mises, prominent leader of the Austrian School of Economics, advocated laissez-faire capitalism and criticized government intervention. Milton Friedman, he was an advocate of free markets and limited government, leader of the Chicago School of Economics. Ayn Rand, best author and radical defender of capitalism. That's capitalism. Ayn Rand, bestseller author, and radical defender of capitalism and individualism, major influence on American libertarianism. Key thinkers of socialism, or Marx, philosopher and economist, wrote the Communist Manifesto and defined modern socialism and communism. He collaborated closely with Friedrich Engels, Vladimir Lenin, leader of the Bolshevik Revolution. And we've all heard of Vladimir Putin. Well, Vladimir Lenin. He was the leader of the Bolshevik Revolution and the architect of the socialist model in the Soviet Union. There's another name I've heard of, Leon Trotsky, Marxist revolutionary who promoted socialism worldwide, including permanent revolution. There's another one I've heard, John Maynard Keynes, founder of Keynesian economics. He advocated for government intervention and public spending to achieve full employment and avoid recession. Paul Sweezy, American Marxist economist. Sweezy helped popularize Marxian economics in the 20th century. Eric Olin Wright, contemporary analytical Marxist sociologist, is a Marxist sociologist known for his work on the class structure and social stratification. Wright sought to pragmatically insert socialist elements into larger capitalist structures. So, overall, what is the difference between communism and socialism? Socialism and communism both advocate collective ownership of production and economic equality, but communism takes this further and seeks to establish a classless, egalitarian society with common ownership of all property and wealth. Under communism, the state is expected to eventually wither away after economic equality is achieved. So, which countries have socialist economies today? Which countries? Again, which countries have socialist economies today? No countries purely are socialist. No countries have purely socialist economies today. But nations like China and the Nordic countries, such as Sweden and Norway, have many socialist policies. Most countries have mixed economies that combine the elements of both capitalism and socialism. So, what are the main benefits and drawbacks of capitalism? Well, proponents argue capitalism promotes economic growth, innovation, and individual choice through free market incentives and competition. Capitalism also encourages entrepreneurship, risk taking, and innovation. Consumers benefit from greater efficiency, lower prices, and higher quality goods and services resulting from businesses pursuing profits. Critics, however, contend that the unfettered capitalism leads to inequality, concentration of wealth, and lack of economic mobility. This is because it prioritizes profit over social welfare, public goods, and environmental concerns. That's environmental concerns. So basically, some economists have identified capitalism as contributing to basically cyclical instability and the tendency towards large monopolies, oligopolies without regulation or oversight. So, what are the main benefits and drawbacks of socialism? Well, in theory, notice, summing up everything, in theory, socialism offers advantages including greater equality, fairness, and shared prosperity through collective ownership of the means of production. Programs that provide basic services like healthcare and education are available to all citizens, and both workers and consumers. They're protected through careful regulation and oversight. So basically, critics argue that removing market incentives reduces productivity, and economic output over time. Central planning is thought to react slower to changing consumer needs and preferences. Moreover, the fear of excessive government power and corruption at the top could lead to reduced individual liberties and authoritarian tendencies. Take notes. Take notes, folks. So the bottom line, capitalism and socialism are two opposite ideas about how economies should work, but neither has been fully applied in its purest form. Most modern nations have complex mixed economies that incorporate elements of both private enterprise and government control. The balance between free markets and centralized planning remains an ongoing source of political debate and economic reform around the world. This debate is relevant in economics and politics as countries continually adjust their economic policies to address contemporary challenges. And I'm just going to say this. This is why I gave you a lot of information. I started to cut it off, but I said, well, you need this education so you understand what's ongoing in these economies. Yeah, that's why I say the young ones never experienced socialism. But I know when I was in my 20s, it was rough. Things weren't fair. I found a way, I figured it out. I went into the military. Now, of course, times do change because we were still, when I was coming up, in the industrial society until the 90s. So some of these young folks are doing excellent things. They're putting out information here on YouTube. They're creating things as well. And that's capitalism. But it is true, even in the United States. We will never have communism here, although we have communist thinkers. But we have, for the most part, a mixed system. And even with a mixed system, we still have corruption. The bottom line, it's not the system that doesn't work. It's people who are in the system that makes it not work. Why? Because there are always individuals who are looking to get ahead over people with dishonesty. Always people who are looking for power to control societies. So in the end, the United States of America is not purely capitalist, not got some socialist values, but I will say, even with all the flaws, even though it's hard, yes, we have a lot of elites here. But the bottom line is, many of us, we have to continually educate ourselves. And that means moving to another country to see how their country is run compared to the United States. That's something you have to do. You have to work smarter, not harder. And in the end, understanding how the country works will give you an edge on individuals who lack knowledge and accessibility to research, and individuals who believe what they hear in the media and these politicians. Bottom line, if you're going to make it anywhere, you have to understand how the economics and the politics of the country works. Once you do that, you will gain the competitive advantage. And that's my commentary for this edition of the 411 Talk Zone radio show right here on YouTube. If you like what I just presented, please comment, share, and subscribe. And if you are looking for some STEM content, check out my second channel, the QCIS channel. On that channel, I give you a daily dose of science, technology, engineering, and of course, math. Now, here's where you can find me. 401 Talk Zone Radio Show channel, which is my main channel. You can find me right here on YouTube, X formerly Twitter, Truth Social, and Rumble. And for the QCIS channel, you can find me right here on YouTube, X formerly Twitter, and of course, LinkedIn. And for you individuals out there who are offended, or you might not be offended but want some education, there are a variety of opinions on these topics. But I will tell you this: don't be jealous of what somebody else has. Why? Because in the end, it's not going to help you at all. Unfortunately, life isn't fair. I don't like the term sometimes. Got to pick yourself up by the boots. Doesn't always work. But again, understanding and educating yourself with how governments, countries, economics works will always be in your favor. So I'm going to say this: while you're alive and well, be blessed for what you have. Don't worry about what you don't have. Always know that the sun rises in the east and sets in the west. If it doesn't apply, let it fly. But if the shoe fits, wear it. If you don't like the shoe, change it. Once again, thank you for listening to this edition of the 411 Talk Zone radio show right here on YouTube. My name is Leon Jones. I want you all to have a wonderful and gracious evening. God bless you. I'm out.